with that, Maurya.
Thanks a lot. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks, Vancouver, for flying me over from Austin. It's the first time in Vancouver, and I'll be back in June with family. So I know we did a schedule change. I'm actually happy to go first, so I don't have the hard job of waking you up after lunch. But that also means I have to end on time, so I don't keep you from lunch. Before I get started, I'm going to be talking about getting your product ready for launch, because that's a topic that Michael mentioned would be good to share with you guys. My book covers the whole process from ideation all the way to launch the product market fit, and I'm going to focus on this one particular area. So before I get started, I'd like to get a sense of who's in the room. How many people here would consider themselves, identify themselves as lean startup practitioners? Okay, great. Thank you. But I assume that everyone is familiar with lean startups. So this is the fundamental build, measure, learn loop that lean startups use to iterate through experiments. And the goal of a startup is finding a plan that works before running out of resources. So we know that speed is key. The cycle time through the loop allows us to fit more iterations at the same time frame. The faster we can go through these loops, the more we can theoretically learn. So we know that learning is key, and specifically learning from customers is what we consider to be the fundamental or the basic measure of progress in a lean startup. But something that doesn't get nearly enough attention is focus. And I'm going to define what I mean by that. So while running experiments is a key activity for lean startups, knowing what experiments to run at the right time and using the right tactics to maximize core learning and speed is really what's critical. And that's what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today. So another way to describe or make the same point is with this diagram. I believe that you need to have all three, speed, learning, and focus, to build an optimal learning loop. And so let's see what happens when you don't have all three. So if you have just speed and focus, this would be a case where you're going very fast and you're focused on certain things, but you're not really learning anything in return. The image of a dog chasing its tail comes to mind. So you're going very fast, but you're just going around in circles. Now, if you're learning a lot of stuff and you're super focused, that's a good thing because you're learning. But if you're not going fast enough, you have the danger of running out of resources, or maybe even proving a market for a competitor to step in and outpace you. And the last area, if you've got speed and learning, the problem you could run into there is that you might be learning the wrong things. So we've spent some time talking about things like AdWords. Rob mentioned that. And so a lot of folks think that they need to optimize their AdWords campaign. So if you become an AdWords expert, Google will gladly give you hours and weeks and months worth of content for you to rock. And you can spend all this time becoming good at those kinds of things, or even becoming good at SEO optimization, and actually lose sight about building a product that is a fundamental thing you should be focused on. So you're running into this trap of maybe running into premature optimization. So at every given point in time, you have to kind of look at what you're doing from this lens of speed, learning, and focus. Am I doing the right actions at the right time? And so during the rest of the presentation, I'm going to talk about how you apply this, as I mentioned, during the MVP phase, or getting your MVP ready for launch. And as we know, the MVP is a form of an experiment as well. And so we want to maximize core speed and learning from customers. But before I get into the meat of it, I'd like to talk a little bit about myself. So I have been a bootstrapper. I've bootstrapped my last company for several years. I sold that company last year. That was acquired Reach. And I'm in between startups right now, so User Cycle is a new one. But throughout that process, I've been really fascinated by what makes startups successful. What are the different ways to build products? So I've tried everything from stealth, which most first-time entrepreneurs think that is the methodology to adopt. So I've tried everything from stealth, release early, release often, do 37 signals, less is more. I've done more is more. I've tried all kinds of things. And with the last product that I built, I ended up using release early, release often. And while that's good theoretically, I spent too long getting the product to launch. That was the first thing. Release early is never quite early enough. And then the release often part kind of assumes you're going to get feedback from customers, which I did, but the feedback was all over the place. And so how do you know who to listen to? And the mistake that I made is I thought I was being smart and listening to the right customers, but I ended up building kind of a bloated product. What started out as a very simple product became hugely bloated. So around that time, I kind of hit this realization that listening to customers was key. I was definitely in that camp, but I didn't know how to listen to them. And so I ran into works from customer development, Steve Blank, Follow the Trail, Eric Ries, and a whole bunch of other folks, which you probably all know by now, and read everything they had to, they were creating. And I decided I was going to apply those techniques to both that product and my next product, which I was about to launch. And when I started doing that, I ran into lots of just tactical difficulties. A lot of what Eric Ries talks about is stories from a company I viewed as no longer a startup. So it was this 40, 50-person company making millions of dollars in revenue. And so they were a lean startup machine. They were doing things like continuous deployment, deploying things in minutes that I could spend months just trying to build a system like that. So I really wanted to cut down to what are the things that really matter to someone, 1 to 3-person startup, and how you really can put the stuff to practice. Steve Blank's writings, again, were very powerful, resonated very strongly. A lot of the tactics, though, were more from enterprise selling. So trying to adopt those for web startups, which is what I was doing, was something I ran into. So I did the next kind of best thing that I thought. I just decided I would be publicly accountable, and I started blogging about all this stuff. So week after week, I started writing a blog, which over time, built some readership, and I've turned that blog into a book now, kind of from the request of some of the readers, and so that I'll kind of share a link to the book at the end. But fundamentally, I reached this realization is that life's just too short to build things nobody wants. And I throughout the products that I've built 5 or 6 products maybe now, not all of them were failures. I've actually been able to build products that people wanted, but it's been kind of a hard process, and so I've been trying to find kind of a better path, a faster path to maybe doing it. And really, that is kind of my new mantra now. And so someone had asked the question, when should you give up? I think that is part of the answer, is that if you're stuck in something where you're not getting the right sets of tools, or you're moving in a direction which is just doesn't make you happy, right? So with my last product, I found a market for it, which was something that I was personally not passionate about. So the customers that I thought I would launch with ended up being the wrong customers, and then I found this other customer base that was right for this market, but I wasn't passionate about that particular problem or domain, and so I decided to sell that business. And so it's a tricky answer, but I think it kind of relates to that. So a few disclaimers I like to put out. I'm very much of a practice prompts theory kind of person. Everything you're going to see here is based on first-hand experiential learning, and you'll get to kind of know a little bit, maybe a lot more than you bargained for about me throughout this process, because I bring in a lot of anecdotal stories and things from my products as a way to illustrate these concepts. And so a few other disclaimers I like to put out. Since I've not built Facebook, I've not built Twitter, my stealth start was maybe kind of an attempt to do something like that, but not quite. But these are the kind of products I have built, so I like to put that out there because I think that it's important to know where some of this is coming from. And while I believe that the 4 meta principles from lean startup and customer development apply universally, not just to startups, but products in general, and not just products even in big companies. Most products have these same uncertain conditions. There are a few fundamental things that I personally believe in, and that is charging from day one. I think if you're going to charge for a product, pricing is part of the product and should not be something that you kind of cop out on with the excuse of wanting to learn first. And then I also believe in something that's been brought up in the morning as well, is you have to start marketing from day one. So building that path to customers is key, and it's something that's usually one of the riskier parts of most business models. And as you know, this is a technical crowd, so you know that there are no silver bullets. Even lean startup cannot guarantee success. Customer development cannot guarantee success. But what we're all trying to do here is try to figure out the right proxies that we can use to raise our odds for success, and maybe switch directions before it's too late. Okay. So let's get into the content. We're going to first talk about getting focused. So the first step that I usually recommend people do is documenting their business model. And reason for this, and by documenting, I don't mean just think about it and talk about the solution and how you're going to solve this problem, but I'm talking about the entire business model. And traditionally, that would be writing a business plan, which I'm sure no one in this room enjoys doing. So I'm going to show you kind of another format that I've been personally using. It's a very simple way to brainstorm business models. But the reason that you have to not only document a business model, and that is getting it out of your head, putting it in writing in some form, is because of this point right here. Is that entrepreneurs are just gifted at carrying these reality distortion fields, and they can rationalize anything. So if you kind of leave yourself unchecked, you will iterate. The fastest way to iterate is in your head, because you can wake up every day and change your mind and try different things, and then if that doesn't work, go try something else. And that's, again, that example of you going maybe fast and having focus, but having very micro-focus. So you're really just chasing your tail. So the format that I like to use is this right here. It's an adaptation from the business model canvas, which was created by Alex Osterwalder. It's a very succinct way of capturing the core aspects of your plan. I don't even like using the word necessarily business model or business plan. Core assumptions of what it is you're going to do on a single piece of paper. And what I really like about that is that it lets you see the interactions. It lets you avoid asking you hard questions. Like most people that I've seen a lot of these canvases now, and a lot of people put in AdWords and SEO in those channels. And when I ask them what are they doing to actually test those, it's usually something they defer to later. And that's usually always the wrong thing to do. Those channels are what kills most of these web startups. And the other area that makes you think really hard is the unfair advantage. That's the competitive advantage. And most people don't really have one when they start out. And it's something that you have to find and build and develop over time. But even just thinking about, what is it that's going to be different about you, and is that difference going to matter, are things that are good to at least put down that initial brainstorm. So the other thing that this is very good for, multiple business models. And so if you decided you were going to do a file sharing app, like one of the apps that I build, I spend no time thinking about who the customers were, but had I done that, I would have created a canvas probably for graphic designers, one for attorneys, because those all ended up being people that became my customers eventually, but not all of them stayed as my customers over time. Doctors, I would have created a canvas for each one, and each one has kind of different problems that they would articulate. They have different prices that they would pay for. And so it's very important to really try to identify who your first customers are going to be, and this is a good tool for that. Now, once you have that, the next step is identifying the riskiest parts of the model. And that's usually dependent on stage and type. So I would say that some of it is really dependent on the specific business model that you have. So whether you're building the next Facebook or you're building a physical product, some of the specifics, the challenges, and what you would consider risky will be different. But I think for the most part, a lot of what you should be focusing on kind of depends on the stage of the startup. So I know this is something that has been mirrored by other speakers, and so I'm going to just kind of walk through this and hopefully reinforce these stages of a startup. So startups typically go through 3 stages, or that's how I like to think of them. The first stage is about finding a problem worth solving. And so this is a period where I do nothing but try to identify, once I have my plan A, which is this business model, lead canvas, I try to identify who are going to be my most promising customers, who are going to be my early adopters. And I just go and set up a few calls with them. And my goal here is not to really pitch a solution. I've not even thought of a solution really yet. I really want to make sure that the problems that I'm trying to solve are really problems that they have. And secondly, if that is the case, I want to make sure that I understand how they're solving those problems today. So we talk about creating disruptive solutions. That's not typically not always, it's not always the case, but that's typically not going to come from customers. It's going to come from the entrepreneur. And this is a great place to kind of bring this analogy in, is that I kind of view customers and entrepreneurs as kind of 2 sides of the same coin. The customers tend to be more passionate about their problems. They couldn't care about your solution. They just want to get their problem solved. While entrepreneurs tend to be the opposite. They are more interested in how they're going to solve things. And so that's a great partnership to forge, and I think that's what fundamentally the customer development process strives to achieve, is if you can involve customers in your product development cycle, you can get kind of visionaries from both sides of the problem to kind of tackle this together. So typically this phase is all customer discovery from the customer development process. You go out there and you would decouple the problem from the solution. You would try to test the problems first, and then you kind of present solutions. And these could be, depending on how big or how complicated the solution is, it could actually be a prototype solution. It could be a screenshot. There are lots of techniques for testing the solution with customers. That's usually when I also like to test pricing and get some commitments. Now, once you have that, you go into a phase where you're then building this MVP. So the outcome of that problem solution fit stage should be a definition of the MVP, what you think is a problem worth solving, and kind of the definition of what it is you're going to go build. Now, once you launch that, you kind of enter that next phase, which is the search for product market fit. You want to make sure that what you've built is really something people want. One of the things that I'll touch on a little bit later is that the first phase, which is the customer discovery qualitative phase, has kind of an Achilles heel, and that is that people lie. People will tell you things that they may not actually go on, like they'll buy your product, or they think this is a great problem to solve, or all these other things. And so you're not really looking for that as being the sole validation. So you have to validate qualitatively, but then follow up with quantitative data to follow, and I'll talk about that some more. So in this phase, we're actually iterating on the product, because what you thought would happen when you talk to those customers and they said they would buy may not happen. You still have to go through cycles of iteration. And many times that's because maybe you do not quite deliver on the promise. Maybe you misunderstood the problem or didn't quite, don't quite have a product that's good enough yet. So that's the phase where we spend a lot of time trying to get the product just right. And once you have that, that's when a lot of the focus shifts into growth. And so accelerating user acquisition. This is also a good time to accelerate, depending on, again, the business model, is to accelerate your capital if you want to move fast into a market. But it's usually only after product market fit that those types of activities make sense. And so what I'm going to be talking about mostly today is going to fit in an intermediate stage from when you've gone out and defined what that MVP is to when you actually launch. What are the things that you can do to make that MVP most fit for learning from customers. So the product market fit stage is a critical milestone for a startup. It actually changes the tactics and the strategies that startups use. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about that, making that distinction. So you can almost divide those three stages into two stages of a startup. There's before product market fit and after product market fit. So before product market fit, the focus typically tends to be on learning. And this is validated learning from customers. And a lot of the data that you gather, because you don't quite have the numbers yet, you don't have enough customers to make statistically significant split tests or A/B tests or any kind of test, is that most of that learning tends to be more qualitative versus quantitative. But once you approach product market fit, or you've got the numbers behind you, and your focus shifts more towards growth and optimization. And that's where you start running more micro experiments. You might start looking at the conversions of your pages and really doing smaller changes where you're changing colors of buttons or placements of things to kind of get the incremental improvements to maximize your business model, essentially. So that's when things like cost of customer acquisition, lifetime value are things you begin to calculate and begin to see, do I have a scalable and repeatable business model, and what are the steps I need to do to basically scale that up. And so kind of another distinction here is that before product market fit, the types of experiments you run are much more bold. So if I had this file sharing product, I would go and test it with a graphic designer and try to understand what they use today and see if this would be a viable solution for them. I've also tested with a doctor. Now, these are very different people, and maybe an attorney. These are very different people, but I'm trying to figure out which is the right customer segment to start my product in, because many products can fit in multiple places. And that's one of the challenges in startups, is that we have got what Eric describes as the unknown problem, unknown solution situation. And in Agile, for example, there's this notion of a product owner. And when we look at startups, because we don't really quite know who the customer quite is yet, there is no product owner. And unfortunately, most entrepreneurs do the next worst things, which is they assign themselves as the product owner. And that's also never usually a good thing. So one other thing that kind of gets affected by the before and after product market fit are even the metrics that we measure. So is everyone familiar with this picture? This is Dave McClure's startup metrics or pirate metrics. And I'll just maybe quickly walk down like what each of these steps are, so for those that may not know what it is. This is essentially a conversion funnel that can be used to codify many types of businesses, from flower shops to web startups. And I'm going to talk about more typical web startups, and something here are technical. So the first step in here, the first macro metric we're measuring is acquisition. And what this is doing is measuring how many people move from being unaware about your product to knowing something about it. So this would be someone ending up on your landing page and maybe doing something, just not leaving right away. Clicking on a link or spending more than 30 seconds on your site would be an example of an acquisition event. The next step below that is activation. So have they turned into a prospect? So they went from unaware to being interested, but now are they doing something to become a prospect of your product? So this would be something like them signing up for your product and using it for the first time. And what we want to measure here is, did we deliver that great user experience to them? And the other metrics in here measure, retention is pretty obvious. It measures do they come back and use your products. And this is actually the ultimate metric that really measures the product market fit, or I would say that maps directly to product market fit. Is if people come and have a first good experience but don't ever come back, then you don't really quite have the product that people want. You have to have people coming back month over month, or whatever your frequency is for you to really measure that. And the revenue is pretty straightforward. That's just all the revenue events you generate, and referral are things like they're basically referral campaigns or people telling others about your product. And so before product market fit, since the goal is building what people want, the two metrics that I tend to focus on the most are activation and retention. So I want to make sure that people are having a great first experience with the product. And kind of more specific to that is that they actually understand what this product is about. The unique value proposition that I'm trying to, the problem that I'm trying to solve actually comes out, and people get that. And then the next metric that you measure quite a bit is the retention one. I have revenue as a dotted line because not everyone charges from day one, but if you do, and you have good retention, revenue and retention usually mirror each other quite well. So if people are coming back and using your product and you're charging them, you need to track it as strongly if you're just tracking retention. Now I'll just mention that since acquisition is at the top of the funnel, you do have to pay some attention to it. And that's where there's kind of a fine line between optimizing and doing just enough. And so at this stage, I typically try to get just enough customers into my pipeline so it can support the learning that I need to do. But I'm not going to go and try to optimize my funnels and become an AdWords or SEO expert just yet. But I'm going to be doing things to build those channels up if those are my channels. But after product market fit is where a lot of attention goes into those kinds of channel building. So those acquisition and referrals are things that people spend or should be spending more time in. The first part is really getting that product right. So once you've identified the riskiest parts of the model, then the next step is to select the right tactics that maximize for speed of learning. And so we'll start with speed first. So the easiest way to launch faster is simply to reduce scope. And typically during the customer interview process, that problem solution fit stage, when I go to the solution interview, so the first interview is just talking about problems and trying to understand how customers solve this problem. And then I go into them typically with my products and I put a screenshot or a mock-up in front of them. So I don't want to build anything yet. As we all know, product development is this rabbit hole, and once you start going down, it's sometimes weeks or months before you surface out again. And so I don't really want to invest that time just yet. And so what I typically do is I do HTML mockups, and I do that because I think they look closest to what the final product is going to look like and minimize on waste, because I'm going to use this same HTML code and CSS code for the product eventually. And I think it just makes it kind of more look like a real product than doing a wireframe or something like that. So that's more of a personal preference. But during this stage, because I'm just working with hard-coded HTML, there's no model behind this screenshot, I can iterate very fast. And so I add things, I remove things during this interview process. But once I get to that point where I've identified what my number one problem is, I then go into this mode where I start with that and I eliminate everything else. And so I take out all the don't needs and the nice to haves in the product because I want to get it to launch first. And many times that's a lot of X's on the screen because you're really just trying to get down to, I don't want to necessarily build feature parity with what's already out there. I want to go out and highlight the one feature that will make the customer want to use this product or will solve a problem that they'd be willing to pay for. And if you have an early adopter, they're willing to kind of wait for the other features to come by. And that's kind of one of the measures of who you're, of distinguishing early adopters from those that want everything before they commit to a product. One other tactic for going fast is continuous deployment. So anyone in the room practice continuous deployment? Few people. So I'll kind of just define what that is first. So if you look at a typical product development cycle, there's some learning that happens at the requirement stage when we're learning about what it is we want to build. Most of the learning really happens only after we launch the product. And there's this big middle where we're not really learning anything from customers. Sure, we're learning about what works, we're building products, we're testing, we're making it better. We're learning a lot of other things, but we're not learning about customers. And for many folks, that is measured in the order of weeks, months, and if you look at the way we build operating systems, years sometimes. And so that's a period of time where we're just disengaged from customers, and it's a point where we can really go astray and build either too many features or build the wrong things. And so what continuous deployment attempts to do is really shorten that cycle time. So there are a few principles, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them here. But essentially what it does is it allows you to kind of break up your traditional releases, and you're not doing 2-week or month iteration cycles with lots of features. You're kind of building things in smaller batches and pushing them out into production sooner rather than later. And it fundamentally is a technique that's used, inspired from the way we do one-flow manufacturing from lean manufacturing, applied to software to push bits out sooner rather than later. And so some of the advantages you get is you kind of mitigate some of the integration risk. If you're building a big bang feature and it's in a branch or it's sitting across 2 or 3 developers, when you push that out into production, you always get unexpected surprises. And so by doing these more periodic pushes, those are some of the things we try to avoid. So here's just a kind of an overview of what a continuous deployment process looks like. As I mentioned, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. There's a lot of content around this, but there's essentially four stages. There's the commit phase, and there's a testing phase, and a lot of these are built on off-the-shelf components, so it's nothing that people shouldn't already have or should already be doing some parts of this already. So things like continuous integration are a key component of this. In deployment, there are some good techniques that companies like Flickr and Big and many of the big ones use, which are one-click push and rollback, and then a feature flipper system, which is super valuable when you're trying to push things incrementally, because we can push things into production and only initially allow ourselves to look at it, ourselves being people inside the company, and then once it's ready for some validation, we then incrementally push it out to a few of those early adopters at first, set up interviews with them, and do usability testing before we push it out to everyone. So the feature flipper system is something that we use quite a bit with every feature that we do. So let's talk about learning next. So the focus before product market fit should really be on learning and not optimization. I covered that a little bit early on. And so that has a direct impact in how we build products or how we even get our MVP ready for launch. So I'm going to take an example from even just the landing page. So has anyone uses Phosphorus? Anyone remembers? Okay. I don't know if anyone remembers, this was their initial landing page. And while it was a very novel way, what they were doing is using a lazy registration approach. But they would essentially tell you to visit this website and then kind of leave that website immediately if you love the product, and then go email them. And then they would create this kind of behind-the-scenes blog or site for you, and that was their activation process. Now the problem is that if I came to this site and it didn't resonate with me, I would do the exact same thing. I would leave as well. And so while this was a kind of a novel idea, and it was a great way, to kind of lower that sign-up friction, as we call it, it was not really architected for learning. So there's no way for me to know if things went wrong. So I wouldn't be able to differentiate my early adopters, people who really wanted to use this product, from those that just abandoned. And even then, if in the early days, even though I get an email, well, what if I had some technical issue and I wasn't able to service that email request? That's just a prospect that I'm just losing. I'm just dropping them on the floor. And so those are all like things that I kind of move away from. And so what I tend to do initially is actually make it even a little bit harder. I put a few more steps. And as you'll see is that if you've got early adopters, they're kind of as visionary as you are, and a few clicks is not going to keep them from using your product. The forms are not our biggest problem. That's something Joshua Porter once said in one of his talks. It's really about the customer motivation. If they're motivated to use your product, they'll fill out the most unwieldy form to kind of get to the product. And if they aren't, you could actually just throw it, you could do all kinds of things to them and even give it away for free, and they would not be interested. So what I tend to do in the acquisition process is just break down my pages into explicit steps. So I'll have one for the landing page, and then a separate one for the pricing. I'll kind of illustrate that with this example. So this is a landing page from, the current landing page from the book that I have online. And what I do on this page is really try to, kind of be true to measure the acquisition process. So I want to get people who kind of hit this website to spend more than 30 seconds reading it. And so if that headline doesn't abandon right away, I want to know that it's because my headline was not effective, not because they saw the price and didn't think this product was worth that much, or many other things that could kind of go wrong. And so I kind of break it into these specific steps. So the things that they want to do here is to spend more time, and then if they want to learn more, that's my first measure of is this page working or not. And then I show them the price. So when they click on buy or kind of learn more, they would go to the pricing page, and then that's where you show the different prices. And then if they abandon here, you can make, it's not necessarily, and that's the thing with metrics. So metrics can tell you, where people are leaving, but they don't tell you why they're leaving. And so we'll talk about how you complement that. But at least I know that, okay, somebody saw the headline and they came to this pricing page, but then they left. So there was something there. They didn't probably like the price, or lots of guesses you can make, but that's the way that I like to break things out. And then once they've done that, then I have the sign-up process. And so I try to break these things explicitly so that there are clear steps between each. And I do the same thing with the activation process. So the activation, again, is a sub-funnel which starts from the sign-up. And so I'm looking at people who are entering my product's funnel. And then there are usually a bunch of additional steps they have to do. They might have to create something or do something. And then in the end, they're going to achieve this, what I call key activity. That is the value proposition that I want them to get. And if they don't get to that key activity, then chances are they're not coming back. And if I go and try to use a product that promises me no uploading, and I'm going to get your galleries created in seconds, and I start the process, but I figure out that I bail out in the middle, chances are I'm not going to really be motivated enough to come back again. So user motivation is one of those things that decays very quickly. And so I try to keep those key activities to be as short as possible, and I want to measure when that happens. And so right here, this will be the sign-up form, and then this is an example from one of the products, but there are a number of steps that people do to create this canvas. And so I measure, kind of where they get throughout this whole process. And once you have that finished canvas built, that would be the key activity. And then there can be some additional things you may want them to do, but this kind of gets the idea is that you break your explicit macro metrics, which is things like acquisition and activation, into sub-funnels, which are tied to key user events that you not only track, but you kind of visualize and measure, and we'll see that in a second. So the terrain before product market fit is riddled with qualitative learning. And so before launching my MVP publicly, I actually go back to the customers or the prospects, which is a better word for them, and not just any prospect, but my early adopter prospects that I interviewed early on. So I want to see how they would use the product first. So these are people who are warm prospects, and my thinking there is that if you can get a warm prospect to sign up through your product with the background knowledge that they have, and come out at the end of it and say this solves the problem, you have no chance in hell trying to do that with a visitor on your website who's only going to look at your website for 8 seconds and make that initial determination of should they move on or not. So I do a lot of usability testing, and so the form that this usually takes is another set of interviews. So after the problem and solution interviews, once I have my MVP built, before the public launch, I go back to these customers, And I don't email them. I don't say, sign up to this thing and let me know what you think. I actually try to set up these one-on-one meetings with them, and preferably one-on-one. So even over the phone, you can't see. You have to be able to see the screen and what they're doing. And so now you just say, here's the product. I show them the landing page, and just have them kind of go through a typical usability test. And for those that want to learn more about it, Steve Krug has got 2 great books on usability testing. He really distills it down to step by step what it is that you need to do, how you need to run them. Because here you kind of have the reverse problem, is that you can actually make the customers feel uncomfortable. It's that they feel like you're testing them. And so there's kind of tricks for kind of making that happen. But I consider usability tests to be the ultimate form of customer interviews. So unlike the other types of interviews where customers can and will lie to your face, usability test is something people can't fake. They're either going to know how to use the product or they're going to get stuck. And even though they may feel bad about it, you know that it's a reflection on your product and not them. And that's something that has to be communicated. So I do like usability tests and use them quite heavily throughout the product development cycle. And so the other thing with qualitative learning that has been shown from research too is that it's just how effective it is at finding and weeding out really bad ideas. So qualitative testing doesn't always tell you, if someone says they're going to buy your product, doesn't mean they're going to actually do it when you put it in front of them. But they're really effective in weeding out really bad ideas. And you don't need a large sample size to do it. From studies from usability testing have shown that with just 3 to 5 people, you uncover 80 to 85% of all the problems on a website. And so it's quite effective. And so to illustrate that, I'm going to share a few landing page iterations that I did with one of my earlier products. So this was a photo sharing app that I was targeting at the time at busy moms or at parents in general. And hopefully you can read that well. But this was the first iteration when we were about to go to launch. I put this in front of these moms and I asked them what they thought about it. And the tagline says the fastest way to share photos and videos, helping parents share their photos and videos instantly. And we got feedback from these moms saying that, well, faster doesn't really mean anything because everyone claims to be fast, so that's just one of those words that doesn't quite have anything compelling. Had they seen this landing page, they probably wouldn't know what's different about it and wouldn't have really cared. The other word, when we said, well, it's about sharing things instantly, right? Instantly means super fast. And they said, well, again, instantly doesn't mean anything. So I'd actually gone out and looked at Facebook and even at Google Ads where they say, get your photos instantly in 30 minutes while you wait. So the word instantly is kind of relative. Even though we think it's 0 time, it doesn't quite equate that way in people's minds. And so this product, just for background, allowed you to share photos and videos without the uploading. So it was really, we were trying to strive for that 0 time creation of the gallery. From the moment you say, here are my photos in a folder or an iPhoto, we get it up on a website in a matter of seconds, or say even less than a second. So we kind of did an iteration next, and we figured that words matter. And so since we were trying to target more busy parents versus parents, we used the word busy parents, and we got good feedback on that. They actually thought that resonated more strongly with some kinds of parents, because not all parents are busy in the same ways. And then the other thing we did is we put that starburst on the right where we said no uploading required. And so words are very powerful. And this was a case where this was something that people noticed right away. But depending on who we talked to, we got 2 immediate reactions, and both of them were bad for us. So the first one that we got were from folks who were more technical, and they said there's no way that this is possible. Right? How can there be no uploading? And so they started challenging us on how this works, and so we had to go into all this debate about, we had to go into explaining how the technology works and what it is that we do. And that's not a conversation you want to have on a landing page. The second thing from folks who were not that technical said, I don't know how this works, and I don't believe you. So we were losing credibility. And so both of those things make people leave the landing page and not want to use it. And so even though that was an effective way to get attention, it was not the right tactic that would get people to trust us and want to use this product. So then we kind of took a different tack, and we tried to figure out, what is this product really about, and we looked at the finished story benefit. And so we kept the same word up there, but we changed the image from kind of showing the feature, which was really not telling anything about the product, to trying to create a visceral reaction with moms. So when someone saw this, they would say, wow, that is me, and I want to learn more. So the goal of this landing page, for example, was not so much to educate our prospects about what this product is and why it's better, but saying, we understand your problem and we have a solution for you. We're not going to tell you what it is, you're going to have to click around to find a little bit more. And so that was something that we did. And while we were doing these interviews, this kind of took a span of a week for us to get that iteration. We also had set up, we had a little bit of traffic coming to the site to the blog, and so we set up a Google AdWords campaign, and we had these 3 or 4 variations up there, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks for us to hit that same result. And so it was at a point where it was not even statistically significant, so we just took it down and figured that we not only got kind of the customer feedback, but they told us exactly why one version worked over the other, which is something metrics can never tell you. So that's an example of how the qualitative can win over quantitative. And no matter how big you get, even Google today and Facebook, they all employ some form of qualitative testing in their development process. So weekly usability tests, customers, giving them out early access to features, all of those things are things that they do as well. And as I mentioned before, the problem with qualitative learning is that it's not perfect. People will lie to you, so you do have to measure metrics. And so turning those funnels that I showed you early on into a conversion dashboard is helpful. It's not only going to be something that's going to be useful at this stage, but down the road, this is how you're going to start measuring and optimizing parts of this funnel and knowing what's working and what's not. And so what each of these show are the macro metrics, and behind every one of them, there's a sub-funnel that you can also visualize. And so I can tell if people are abandoning on my pricing page, and that might tell me maybe I want to do some price testing. I might be able to find out that people are not completing the activation flow altogether, which means I have to probably iterate and try to streamline that process so it's simpler, or there's something missing that I have to fix there. So that's what these are, but the more important thing at this stage is not as much the numbers, but going behind the numbers. So Eric Ries had also talked about kind of this meme a while ago about metrics being people too, and I think metrics are people first. In this stage, being able to get behind the people behind being able to get to the people behind the metrics is really key in being able to talk to them and figuring out what's going wrong. And so in this example, when you first launched, as I mentioned early on, lots of things can and do go wrong. So we had an app that was a downloadable app, and we knew that there was a big cliff. It's not maybe shown in this funnel, but we had a huge cliff from when people signed up to when they actually created their first gallery in that photo sharing example. So we knew something was happening during the download process. We didn't quite know what. And so we spent weeks coming up with all kinds of things, installer size and just the flow. We kept tweaking the flow over and over again. And then we got this idea to just start collecting the email addresses before the download process. And once we could identify those that actually failed that step, let's just reach out to them and see if they'd be willing to talk to us. And surprisingly enough, a lot of people did, because if you get them at that right point in time, when the motivation is high, when they have just downloaded your app because they're super excited, and something goes wrong, and then they get an email from you saying you know that and you care and you want to help, they'll respond. But if you wait for even a day or 2 days, that motivation goes on. Even if that email comes then, they'll just be like, well, this didn't work for me. I'm not going to waste any more time with it. So that was kind of a key thing for us to help not only uncover what was going wrong, but then fix it out, give it to them and convert them into the next phase of that funnel. And so it was also great customer service in that regard. So really what I like to think of the funnel as, I think the ideal conversion funnel is really part analytics and part customer development, part customer relationship management. So you've got to be able to visualize people in the funnel. Another thing that we run into is that when you do a public launch, there's no way to control what kind of traffic you're going to get. So during the interviewing process, you can be very selective about what types of customers you want to talk to and what kind of questions you're going to ask them. But once people start using this, especially if you God forbid, get tech crunched, then you're going to get just this slew of people that are just drive-by web visitors. They're going to come and look at this stuff, and they're going to skew a lot of your numbers. And so even being able to kind of segment your users over time are things that are things that we are starting to do, and there's certainly some products out there that help you do those kinds of things. But being able to put users into buckets and identify your most kind of active users on your site from those that maybe are not, and reacting to them differently. Setting up meetings with them and talking to them differently are things that are kind of interesting in the space. So I think that the key really in applying a lot of this lean startup customer development process to a web startup is building a continuous feedback loop with customers throughout the product development cycle. So again, going to Steve Blank's example where he talks about customer development, the 4 steps to epiphany, because of enterprise selling model, there's an implicit customer relationship management component to it. So if you buy a 6-7 figure item from a company, chances are you're going to be assigned an account rep and an account manager who's going to go out golfing with you or go out to lunch with you, and that's a way of maintaining that customer interaction with the client. In the web world, we kind of throw this out there, and so we've got to build ways of making that happen. And so for me, those are some of the techniques that I've kind of outlined. Is we do a lot of those customer interviews, usability testing, and the key there is building that optimal learning loop, kind of built on these speed, learning, and focus. And I think that's all I have. I'm going to end here and take some questions. And actually, just before I go on, all of this content that I just kind of blurted out is all in this book. And it's online. There's a discount code if you're interested in purchasing it. Other than that, my contact information is out there. I'm also very reachable over email or I usually have my Skype and my Twitter are the same thing. So I do also spend some time talking to startups, and so I'm more than interested to do those kinds of things. Okay, thank you.
Early in your presentation, one of the things that you said was charge from day one. But when you were showing me your uploading your picture, it said try us for free. So can you explain
Sure.
how that works?
Yeah, so the try us for free was really a try us for free. It was a 30-day trial. So when I say charge for day one, we're increasingly kind of in a place now where people expect to try something before they buy it. So I don't consider trials, 14, 30-day trials as being not charging. There's still a price that people have the expectation of paying at the end of that. I think it was even a 14-day trial in that case.
So you have them give you credit card information, they got 40 days for free, and then they'd have to back out of it.
Right, and in that perspective, again, whether you take credit cards or not, those are all different things you can do. There's been some crackdown recently about taking credit cards up front. There's a practice called negative billing that actually Congress was cracking down on last year. So whether you take it up front or not, again, is irrelevant. But the idea is that there is that expectation that after 14 days, software will go kind of inactive, and so you have to pay to keep using it.
So creating a free model that people can use and then offering to charge them for extra modules and stuff like that, it's just not what you would recommend.
So again, I think different things apply to different types of startups. So what you're describing is more like a freemium model, and I have a lot that I talk about that specifically in my book. But just in a nutshell, I do think in starting with the premium part first, I think free is a great marketing tactic. It's not a business model, but it's great for bringing people to try your product. And if you don't quite know what it is they're going to really be paying for, I'd much rather start with the premium part and then introduce the free a little bit later. So I'm a big fan of freemium, but I just don't believe in starting with freemium.
I've got the stupid question of the day. What does MVP mean?
Oh, okay. So MVP literally stands for the minimum viable product, and so there are many definitions of it, but I would say the one that's kind of most true, the way like Eric would describe it, is the minimum feature set that you launch with that allows you to start learning from customers. And then kind of a lot of variations. So people call the landing page an MVP. People call so it can be used very loosely. It can be the smallest thing you do to test a hypothesis. That's kind of another alternate definition.
What's that ideal trial period? Is it 30 days? Is it 14 days? Is 30 days too long? You're going to potentially lose them?
Sure. I think, again, it's really a question. So Apple has a 60-day trial period, which I do think is too long. But so I have typically used 30 days or less. And again, it depends on how, I kind of look at it from a customer standpoint to see how quickly they will get the value of the product. And if it's readily apparent, then 14 days should be good enough. So I've been leaning more towards 14 days with some of my products. I think if I can really kind of deliver that, it's good, because otherwise you get into this phase where if you give them 30 days, their chances are not they're going to wait till the last day, and sometimes they may actually lose interest, or they may. So losing interest is a different problem. But I would say whatever trial period that you're looking at, you want to really manage that trial process, being able to see what they're doing towards it, and almost treating them as becoming the account rep for your customers. Because when things go wrong and either they don't upgrade at the end of 30 days, or they're not coming back and using their products on day 3 or 5 or 7, are cues for you to kind of reach out and see if there's something that you can learn in the process. Now, some people may not, entertain that, but again, there are tactics you can offer, gift cards and all kinds of things you can do in various levels of escalation to try to get them to talk to you, because that is just learning that is just great to have for yourself.
Do you think there's much difference in the kind of testing and how you set up testing between B2C and B2B products?
Sure, I think specific tactics will definitely vary. So a lot of what I was talking about here was converting from landing pages, and that would be more of a self-serve B2C type of product. And again, Steve Blacksburg talks about the whole process of in the enterprise sales cycle, there's a dance that you have to do, identifying the different parties and playing that dance. And so there are definitely different tactics and strategies and different measures of success. So absolutely.
But in terms of sort of it seems to me there's this gulf where there's enterprise over here, and then there's cool things for your iPhone over here. There's this growing market of software as a service or business.
Yeah.
You can't go and visit them and have the same enterprise relationship with them.
Right.
Do you have any comments on how you can do that, or what?
Well, so I would say that if you're definitely in the SaaS space, there's certainly a price point that you're looking at, which is not the 6-7 figures. And I think there a lot of these things apply, kind of whether you're selling a $1 iPhone app to a $500 a month or $1,000 a month subscription to a company. I think there's a lot of more, this things more in common than when you go into that more direct sales type of channel.
You talked about customers like to lie, or they lie to you on a regular basis. What are the better ways that you found for them to stop lying to you and being able to express actually what they do want and they don't want?
Sure. Well, so and that's a very good question. I think some of it just is built over the interview. It's built over time from the kinds of interview questions you ask them. So typically, most of the interviews that I do, they're usually set-up interviews. So I would kind of spend a few minutes just setting up the context of the problem. And I really want them to kind of comment on what those problems kind of really mean to them. So just rank them. So that can be a place where people can lie, and so this is really important to me. But then I want to kind of go, so the way you do is you go levels deep. So then you ask them, so how are they solving, how are they dealing with that problem today? And if it turns out that, they are really doing nothing about it, and no one's really caring about it, that's just the case where it's not really that high of a problem. So it's just going levels deep, and if they are, on the other hand, they are either using another product or spending thousands of dollars a month, it gives you all this information that helps you kind of prove or disprove what they said early on. So it's not really calling them out on it, but just really trying to get that sense through some of these lines of questioning.
Okay, so would you say that is more lying face-to-face than, say, an email conversation or electronic conversation?
No, I would say that there's, so because of the ability to kind of go deeper and ask multiple things, I find the qualitative, the interviewing to be far more effective in getting a strong sense of, is this something that they would really use and care about, than doing an online survey or definitely email. So the problem with surveys is that it assumes you know that you have the right questions to ask, which is not always the case because there's a lot of exploration that happens. And then the other thing is that it assumes you know the right answers too. So many surveys have this multiple choice question, A to B, and then there's an other, which is this essay long thing. And if people start filling out enough of those sections, they're just going to give up and not finish the survey. So interviewing is much more effective in uncovering kind of the root cause behind it. So your goal is really to understand the problem from their perspective. And the only way, again, to kind of get to that is to see what they're doing about it. So one of the things that I talk about also is that before you launch, we have to measure what customers say. And so the way we do it is by going levels of deep. And then after we launch, we should focus more what they do than what they say.
Sure.
If you were to take 1,000 or 100 people that had filled out the Lean Startup Canvas and you looked at their answers and you sort of tried to align them, would you see any patterns that come out as things that are working and things that aren't working?
Well, I typically see a lot of canvases that are really not going specific enough. So everyone, and marketers are in the same boat, is we all want to market to mainstream. And so we all build these products where we're more passionate about the solution. So that box is purposely small in that canvas because in this stage we want to really focus on more of the other things than the actual solution. But what I typically find there is a lot of people kind of cop out on areas like channels or the customer segments and not really being very rigorous about who their customers are going to be. And that is one of the fundamental, cores of customer development is you want to identify your early adopters and your early evangelists as quickly as possible, and not just identify them. And by that I mean identify the distinguishing characteristics, but also how you're going to reach them.
There's a question over there. No?
Sorry, is competitors a relevant field to actively start a canvas?
That's a very good question. And the reason that I don't have that explicitly, I didn't explain that enough. So this is an adaptation from Alex Osterwalder's canvas, and he doesn't have it either.
Yeah.
I added a few fields that made it more lean startup centric. But the reason I don't like competitors in there is because the competition is usually not who you think they are. So even with that photo sharing product, I had immediately thought, Facebook and Flickr and SmugMug would be the answers I'd be getting back. And what I found is that most moms weren't using those, they were actually using email. And so the competition that we think we know is usually not always the case. And so I have another section there for existing alternatives. And to me, my existing alternatives are my competitors. So if they're using Salesforce versus email versus something else, those are who I really want to work with. So I miss your...
Do you have tool recommendations for the method tracking that you were describing earlier?
Sure. So I've cut my teeth on two specifically. Well, I've done Google Analytics, and I've done Kissmetrics and Mixpanel. That's where I have the most experience. Lately, though, I've been using a homegrown system for that, and that's really what user cycle is going to morph into. And so user cycle is some of the stuff that I was talking about that kind of puts a more emphasis on people versus actual metrics, and on that blend between analytics and customer relationship management that we get today. So, any other questions?
I'm interested to hear more about your in-person interviews, specifically how you do that. Like, do you go to a cafe or coffee shop and just start interviewing people, or do you have an office and you post an ad somewhere? I'm just curious because I'm really intrigued by the idea.
Sure. Well, so obviously the first step is identifying who are these people, right? So when I have the mom case, usually the easiest thing for most people is to start with people they know. So I would go down to the list of people, and because I just had kids at the time, I knew several moms, and my kids were in daycare, so I had a lot of kind of pool to start with. And so I would say that starting with your 1 degree network is usually the best place to start. So if you're looking for a wedding photographer, who do you know that's a wedding photographer? Now, typically the answers you get there can be kind of more on that kind of line type of stage. That it'll either be too polite if they and encourage you if they think entrepreneur is a good thing, or discourage you if they think it's a bad thing. And so to me, it's very important to use them not so much for the answers, but to use them to get to other people, because wedding photographers know other wedding photographers, and so I ask for referrals at the end of every one of those. Now, separate from that, I mentioned channel building is very important. So if a channel that I'm going to use happens to be my blog or happens to be AdWords, by all means, I'm going to create a landing page and test those as well. So I think for the most part, because all the learning can be accomplished with fewer numbers than the quantitative, I figure you can start anywhere, but at any time possible, you can start to inject the actual channels that you may start employing and testing those. Start to test the revenue later. More questions?
Do you think it's okay to use open source versus when is it important to actually buy proprietary product when you're building your website, your service?
When you're building a website,
Yeah. I mean, so much is open source nowadays.
Sure.
If you tempted to go all open source.
Yeah.
Is there anything worth buying?
oh, I see. So from a provider perspective, well, so I definitely think open source is a great thing, and whenever possible, I use everything open source because it is not only is it cheap, but it's quality too, depending on the open source packages you use. But at the same time, I think that there are tons and tons of customer problems that are unmet, and I think many of these also tend to many of these open source packages tend to be more things like platforms, how do you bring up a website or a database. And there are lots of vertical solutions that you can offer, and a lot of what we're seeing in the SaaS space, for example, are going to smaller segments of the market and solving very specific problems for them. And that's where open source is not always where you find an answer. So there's still lots of problems there that are going unsolved.
Last question, Kate.
How much time do you spend building the tools to do your measuring versus building products?
Sure. So, yeah, that's a great question, and I think the key thing there, even with the continuous deployment slide, for example, I begin to highlight that there are steps, and in the book, for example, I talk about even specific places where there are dead times. So in the beginning, for example, when you're interviewing customers, even coming from lean manufacturing, the biggest form of waste is waiting, and setting up those interviews is very inefficient. People are going to cancel on you, you're waiting between times, and you shouldn't really be building a lot of that product yet. So that's an ideal time to set up some infrastructure. So that's when I would get my kind of ducks in a row and get a simple continuous deployment system or integration server up. So you find those dead times to kind of fit those things in. And then again, it's identifying which metrics do you need first. So even in that version dashboard, there were a bunch of TBDs at the end. So when I first launched, because I'm not going to be charging about a trial product for 30 days, I don't necessarily prioritize building that. I even do like what the 37 Signal guys approach. I don't even think about a building process for that because maybe no one will even want to pay for this thing. So it's much better to delay those kinds of things and do it just in time. All right, thanks a lot.